when you look at each one of them, each one driver has their own points in the season where it's just not been good. It's not gone well. Whether that's because of driver error, team error, car error, it doesn't matter. It's they've had their points, and nobody's had a perfect season. Welcome back, guys, to the channel where today I'm going to be going through a sort of review of each of the title contenders' seasons to see who actually deserves it the most. Because there's a lot of debate online, as there should be, as to who's done the best season, who gets judged too harshly, and I think when you look at the data from their seasons, you can draw a pretty good comparison as to who has done the best overall. But I'm not here to tell you that. I'm here to show you enough information for you to make your own decision as to who you think has done the best season. And that's why I start with the current championship leader in Lando Norris. And as I've written, I think he probably was the expected champion and kind of still is going into this season. Because, of course, he's partnered with Oscar Piastri, who's in his third season, who in 2024 looked strong, but not comparable to Lando. So, naturally, when we came into 2025, I think most of us thought this is going to be quite comfortable for Lando in the sense that Oscar might get a few races on him, but Lando would be the more consistent across the season, and that hasn't really panned out. For example, in my opinion, Lando Norris had a pretty awful start of the season. As you can see on screen, I'm showing his qualifying in Saudi Arabia. We've also got his incident in Canada, crashing into his teammate. We also have the engine failure. This isn't the start of the season, but we had the engine failure at Zandvoort. But even though he's had these sort of points where he's had low bits in the season and he hasn't been doing very well, I think it's impossible not to acknowledge results like Mexico and Brazil and Silver, not really Silverstone, but the races he's won this year, like Austria, for example, he's done very well in all of those. And I think people who discredit that, they clearly are coming in with too much bias against him because whilst he has had a lot of scrappy mistakes this year, which you can definitely make the case for it not being acceptable considering he's been in the sport for so many years, since 2018. So you can make that case, but you simply can't say that he's been bad this season. You can't. You can say he's had faults, but he's had some very, very strong races. And as I said, Mexico is kind of the standout where he completely dominated it. So I think it's interesting to, with all of this in regards, to look at his sort of averages, where I've got it for the first 10 races for Lando and round 11 onwards. And the significance of these is the first 10 races is where Lando was making lots of silly mistakes in qualifying, notably. And after that first 10 rounds, that's when he started picking up the form in winning races like Monaco, Austria, etc., etc. That's where he started doing well this season, and it reflects in the data, as you can see, a 3.8 qualifying average, which, if you cast your minds back to the start of the season, you only need to look at Saudi Arabia where he crashes in Q3. He has China where he messed up his qualifying lap and just aborted the final lap. You have Bahrain where he was just slow compared to Oscar. And in general, that first 10 rounds is where we saw all of the mistakes from Lando. And if he doesn't come out to win this championship, you need to point back to that beginning of the season where everything after that, as you can see, 2.4 qualifying average from round 11 onwards, which of course is more races. He's got more samples for round 11 to round 23 than he does in the first 10 races. So his qualifying has massively picked up, and the average race position looks bad, but you need to consider that includes the disqualification in Vegas. So it isn't actually fifth. It's just made worse because of A, the DNF in Zandvoort, and B, the disqualification in Las Vegas. So his average would actually be better in the races, discounting those, but you have to count them. Um, and I just think overall as a season, it just has been split in two halves, as you can do for actually all three of the drivers. All three of the drivers have had very low points in the season, but then followed by really, really high points at different parts of the calendar. So I think overall, I don't think Lando's had a great season, in my opinion, because like I said at the start, he comes into the season as the more experienced McLaren driver. He kind of had a chance at fighting loosely for the title last year. So he has gone against Max Verstappen in rage mode, fighting for the title. And you just kind of expect him to be more consistent, but it just the problems that have persisted across a lot of his career just continue into this year where he just quite easily buckles under pressure, unfortunately, compared to the drivers like Max or Fernando, for example. He's not good with pressure, and also at the start of the season, the starts were not great either. So it's not been the best season. It's been very strong in these last, well, rounds after round 10. He's dominated some races, but are we saying that that counts as him having a great season? I personally don't think so, because you have to acknowledge those first 10 races where he was just poor. And you have to also kind of accept the fact that there have been a couple scenarios where McLaren have favoured him over Oscar. Like, I'm not out here shouting for complete team bias, but there have been points in the season where Lando has certainly gotten preferential treatment over Oscar. So that's kind of the narrative of Lando over the season. So now we move on to chapter 2. And yes, chapter 2 is Max Verstappen, as you might imagine, with him being second in the championship. And I've labelled him the underdog because, I mean, he's nothing but that this season. We came into the year with the Red Bull quite comfortably and comprehensively beaten by McLaren. You just need to go as far as Melbourne in the first race. If it weren't for a load of safety cars and craziness, Max Verstappen probably would have finished a minute behind the McLarens. Like, it was that bad. And I think, as everyone says, when you got to Zandvoort and he's 100 points back from the championship lead, nobody would have thought he'd win this. And I think Max Verstappen's season is the most interesting to look at data wise, because as I'll get onto after I show some highlights, it's quite extraordinary how it's panned out actually. And I think with him being 12 points off the championship now, you have to look at moments such as Spain, of course, where I believe he probably would have finished fifth, maybe even fourth, because there was still some time in the race after that. But point is, he lost like 9 points in that race, because of the penalty of just crashing into George Russell for no reason. And that was instigated by his team being silly by telling him to give back a position he didn't need to. But a complete head loss from Max Verstappen there. and definitely something that he says he won't rue that mistake. He says he doesn't care about it. But if he does lose the championship by 9 points, I don't care what anyone says. You are going to go back to that and be like, why the hell did I do that? Because it is a stupid move. It's stupid that you did that. And it doesn't help when you've got also Austria, where he gets absolutely KO'd by Kimi Antonelli. Nothing he could have done there. That's another probably 10 or 12 points that he lost from that race. And it's moments like this where, similar to Lando Norris's engine DNF, it's just completely out of their control. And it is massively consequential in the championship because if he were to finish fourth in this race, Max Verstappen would now be joint first in the championship. So it's crucial to look at these sort of incidents and also driver errors such as Silverstone, where on the safety car restart, Max was in, I wouldn't say a comfortable second because his car was set up for dry conditions for some reason. I don't know why his team did that. So he probably would have finished third in this race, but he drops it on the safety car restart, loses the place to Lando. Both McLarens are ahead of him. And again, this is a moment that doesn't really get talked about too much because he did recover to P5, I believe. So it was only a 5 point loss. But it's it all adds up across the season. And this was the point in the year where the Red Bull was just lacking. Like it wasn't very strong. So clearly he's pushing too hard and has made mistakes like this. But in the same breath as that, you also had absolutely phenomenal races when the Red Bull wasn't very good, such as Imola, where honestly, move of the season still going into turn one from what was third going into the first corner in the lead. Absolutely incredible move. And there's nothing more, you can't say it's not incredible. That is an amazing move that he did. And it really showed how much he's pushing and like how good of a driver Max Verstappen is. Because that car in the following rounds was nowhere really. And yet you've got a track like Imola where clearly he seems to be quite good around there. But an absolutely sensational move to go on and lead the race very dominantly. It was only brought closer because I believe there was a safety car towards the end. If not for that, he comfortably won that race. So that is something you need to keep a mind of, as well as races like, even though he didn't win in Saudi Arabia, he got an amazing pole position there. So Max has had a really, really good underdog season. And when you look at the data for it, it's actually kind of, it makes you speechless when not the qualifying results in the sense that qualifying's kind of been the same the whole season. Like, not the first 15 races, that's before Zandvoort, by the way. Um, the Red Bull wasn't particularly great, so he had an average qualifying position of 3.5 and an average race position of 5 or 5th, which partly is influenced by the Spain shenanigans and the Austria incident, just as Lando Norris had a higher one because of his engine DNF. But the real sort of thing to look at here is the rounds after Zandvoort, where his qualifying position is higher, but that is because of Brazil, where he obviously qualified 16th, and that was very much so an outlier. And that was his fault. I mean, the team did a bad car setup, but that was his fault, so that does bring him down. But he managed to recover it to third. And when you look at the race position, average race position from round 16 to 23, a 1.6 is absolutely insane. I'm sorry, but that is incredible for a car that was not good at the start of the season. I know it got upgrades, but 1.6 average race position. And that is completely why he's back in this championship fight. Because, yes, some of this is down to McLaren, it's not all him. But that is an insane amount to pull back 100 points to be well, ahead on points of Piastri and only 12 behind the championship lead. So I think if you were to sort of sum up Max's season in terms of whether he deserves a championship, I think you kind of need to label it as missed opportunities slash sort of, I don't know, it's if not for self-inflicted mistakes, he would be so much, but he'd be doing so much better. But on the races where he got given even a sniff of an opportunity, he capitalized on all of them. So you can't really discredit him for that because I think it's something you see with both McLaren drivers where they have races where they've got everything going well for them and you expect them to win, and then it just falls away from them. And you didn't really see that with Max this year. When he got in that position to fight for a win, like properly fight for a win, he converted it. And that is why I think a lot of people are going to be behind Max. A lot of Max haters are now supporting him because it has been that incredible. And it'll be very interesting to see how he approaches Abu Dhabi because of course he needs other drivers to get on the other steps of the podium for him to win it. And I think if he qualifies behind Norris, I wouldn't put it out the realms of possibility that Norris just gets bundled off the track because we know how Max drives. People say he's changed, but I don't think he has changed. He just hasn't had the necessity to drive like that. Like in 22, 23, he had no competition. 24, you saw it in Mexico and Austria, in Austin, him driving like that. And then I'm sure you'll see it this year if he gets the opportunity on Lando. So that's kind of Max's season overall. And then lastly, we move on to chapter 3. Yes, and as you can see, chapter 3, I have Oscar Piastri as the newcomer, I suppose. And the reason why I've labelled him that is because, as I said for Norris, Oscar Piastri came into the season, you would say as the underdog if Max Verstappen didn't steal that title from him. So I would have put underdog for Oscar, but considering his form at the beginning of the season, you just can't call him that anymore. So he kind of is the newcomer to the championship fight because this is his first championship fight. And at the beginning of the season, he was doing incredibly well. However, in the latter stages of the season, he's just allowed it to fall away from himself so easily, with incidents such as Baku crashing twice in the same weekend, which was pretty awful, and stalling on the grid as well, or jump starting, I mean. And then you've got incidents like Melbourne, where yes, Lando made the same mistake, but they both still made a mistake, and it cost him dearly, finishing 10th or ninth. I can't remember. So that's another mistake in a season, and that was even early on. And then you've got even incidents with McLaren where he's just been too kind, I suppose. And it's a difficult thing to assess because, of course, if he ignores these team orders like he followed in Monza, if he ignores these, then of course the tension within the team is going to be really high. And it's probably not a climate you want to stay in. And he'd probably kind of get ousted out of the team at some point if he did continue doing that. But I do think there have been points where he's just too kind and too playing for the team in the sense that he's fighting for the championship this year. And yeah, it's not fair that McLaren are asking him to do these things, but some of them you need to push back. It's a symptom of the fact that he has no power in that team. And that is partly due to him not making that impact and showing why he should have that power in the team. Because you look at Max Verstappen in Red Bull, they're never going to tell him to swap positions. And if they do, he's literally going to threaten to leave the team. And look at, I don't know, Aston Martin with Fernando Alonso, or Ferrari with Charles Leclerc. He always gets annoyed if he gets told to swap for no reason. So it's a symptom of his season where it's like he's been too team playery for a lot of the races, and it has cost him points. And even with that, he has had some amazing drives, such as China, for example, his first win of the season, and a very strong win. But all of his wins in the first part of the season, I know it's harsh to say, and I do think they're deserved, but it did kind of come down to the fact that he had no real challenges. It's very much like Max in 2023, where, as I said on Norris's section, Norris was making lots of qualifying mistakes, so Norris was never really there in those first sort of 10 races to properly challenge Piastri, because the problem is Piastri would qualify on pole or on the front row, and then he just drives away in clean air, whilst Norris gets no opportunity to fight him because he has to go through the field. And then, of course, Max Verstappen had a bad car at that point. So those wins kind of were expected for Oscar. It was still a very good job in how he won those races. But I do think it would have looked a lot different if the other drivers did better at that point. Because I think when you look back at the season as a whole, it's fair to say that we've had very, very little championship fights, as in the top three in the championship fighting each other on track. And that is a symptom of the first part of the season where Oscar was winning everything because the others just weren't there. So it's it's difficult to weigh up a season really because you look at the data, and I've gone for the first 16 races because that's up until his absolute collapse in form in Baku. Um, where his average qualifying position was really strong at 2.1 for 16 rounds. That's pretty incredible. And then followed up by an average race position of 2.4. You can just see how well Oscar was doing at the start of the season. Forget the reasons why that happened, but he was very, very consistent. And definitely, if you ended the race count at 16, you would say he was by far the most deserving. By far. Because he did a great job at the start of the season. But then you look at round 17 onwards, and that qualifying position jumps up to 5.1. And then the race position goes up to 8.3. Which, yes, again with Norris, he had the disqualification. But it still would be so much higher. And it's just completely mysterious how he lost this much form in literally what is 6 races or 7 races. It's incredible that he's literally fallen off that much. And it is a large reason why it's difficult to say if Oscar comes out as the champion in Abu Dhabi, is he that deserving of it? You would say so for the first 16 races, but then his last 7 have been horrific. And it really just, because of recency bias as well, because those bad races were more recent, it kind of just leaves that impression where it's like, he didn't really have a good season. Because he didn't. Both McLaren drivers had points where self inflicted, they did not do well. And it's not great. And maybe some of you guys choose to forgive the last few races for Oscar, but I do think that is difficult to do because they have been so bad, and it is what has completely dissolved his championship lead, and is what could, after Abu Dhabi, cause them to not win the championship. So that's kind of my analysis or a brief rundown over the top 3 in the championship, where I think when you look at each one of them, each one driver has their own points in the season where it's just not been good. It's not gone well. Whether that's because of driver error, team error, car error, it doesn't matter. It's they've had their points and nobody's had a perfect season. None of them have. However, there have been lots of high profile mistakes, And it depends how much you weigh different incidents as to whether they deserve the championship more. Because, you know, Oscar's led most of the season, Max has had a bad car most of the season, Lando's had a really good last few races. You could argue all three of them deserve it equally, but let me know what you guys think in the comments as to who you think deserves it the most. Of course, I've given everything a brief rundown here, so feel free to use this as sort of evidence to support you. Um, and if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe, and I will leave you with chapter 4. See you in the next video.